I'm Josh Pyke. I'm a musician and an author. I'm a husband and a father, and as you can see, I'm a white guy. And I wanted to talk to you today about something that happened recently, and it's a hard story to tell because it isn't flattering. It made me realize that in a particular aspect of my life, I've been entitled and oblivious. And it made me question what I see as my most important role, which is that of a dad, and I happen to be the white dad of half Vietnamese kids. Now, for many people listening, this will be a really familiar story, and that is obviously the problem. But as a white person growing up in Australia, this situation that I'll tell you about wasn't familiar to me at all. And it's not as though I thought racism was a thing of the past. In fact, I think of myself as somebody that recognises racism and actively tries not to contribute to the harm that it causes. But it's really easy to be oblivious to something when it isn't directed at you, and that obliviousness or complacency can cause a lot of harm too. And I share my world with my wife and my kids. This kind of thing still happens in their world all the time. So what actually happened? Well, we were going on a family hike to the Royal National Park, and I was really excited about it. But when we got there, we saw a sign pinned to a telegraph pole, and it was a pretty graphic image of a beheaded and skinned deer. There were two Asian men in the image. I've scribbled their faces out here, but they weren't actually scribbled out in the original. And it was a sign warning against illegal hunting in the national park. Now, I'm going to leave the sign there for a moment because it made my wife feel a really particular way. And I just want you to ask yourselves, what it makes you think. But we walked on and we came to the entrance to the national park where we were greeted with an official park sign with an unofficial handwritten addition, which wasn't quite as welcoming. COVID-free, so fuck off. Now again, my wife felt that this sign was, pointed, but I wasn't necessarily sure. We walked further in, we came to another sign with another handwritten addition, but this one also had another one of these handmade posters at the bottom of it. It had a real vigilante justice kind of feeling to it. And it warned of the invasion of X Beach, where an estimated 1,000 people of mostly Chinese descent had descended upon the beach to poach urchins and anything else that could be eaten. It sounded like a plague of locusts. Now, as you can see, the whole sign was translated into Chinese. There was another unedited Asian male in the poster, and to top it all off, it had been put there by the X Beach Protection League, which has a certain ring to it. Now, we were standing there with my family in this beautiful, thought to be inclusive space, but it was only at that point that I realised that 3 out of 4 of us were not welcome there. Now, from the very first sign, my wife had felt unsafe, and it wasn't just because of graphic images or aggressive swear words. It was because of how she read the signs based on her prior experiences of racism. And again, this is nothing new, but the point is, the way I read the signs meant that I didn't fully get it until the 4th. It's not that I couldn't see how she thought the signs might be racist. It was that I naively didn't give nearly enough weight to how threatened or vulnerable these signs would make her feel, particularly with our kids present. And in that moment, I was angry at the sign writers, obviously, but mostly I was deeply disappointed. I was disappointed that this was clearly so familiar to my wife. I was disappointed that my kids are now being impacted by this, and I was really disappointed in my own naivety. My wife and I have been together for 17 years. She's my rock, she's my life partner. We're a biracial couple, so it's not as though the issue of racism is something that's just dawned on me. Sarah's super intelligent, way more educated than me, and we speak really robustly about everything, including racism. But it's very different speaking with her, a mature and capable adult, about her experiences of prejudice and then seeing my kids, who are inherently vulnerable and in need of protection, experiencing the same thing. And I'm disappointed to say that it took seeing my own flesh and blood experiencing something like this to see how easily somebody like me can unwittingly diminish the impact that racism can have because it may at first seem incongruous or intangible to me. I was disappointed. And this is not to self-flagellate, it's not to seek congratulations. it's to acknowledge a work in progress. Because when Sarah and I first got together, she never wanted to go to the pub, and I love the pub. But she said that as an Asian person, she didn't feel particularly welcome in those environments. And I'd try to make her feel better. I would say, well, I'm sure you're wrong. I've never seen anybody be racist to you. I'm sure that I would have noticed something like this. More recently, a colleague that she was friendly with made a comment that she found to be obliviously or casually racist. But I questioned her instinct about whether or not that was actually a racist experience at all. Maybe the person wasn't being racist, maybe they were just being a jerk. And the truth is, I've been guilty of sometimes trivializing my wife's experiences of racism by trying to explain them away or read them differently or cast them in a more positive light. And my intentions were good, but it still can result in harm, because the fact is, the inherent privilege that I have as a white person actually allows me to choose not to see things in a racist light. They're not directed at me. I haven't experienced prejudice of that nature, and I don't want it in my life. And so at times I've been guilty of choosing not to see it that way. But of course, my wife and my kids can't just choose to see a racist situation in a different light, because that racist situation puts them in a vulnerable or a threatened position. Now, that day after the national park, we wanted to talk to our kids about racism. We asked them if they thought that they'd experienced it. And it's complicated, they're still young. My 11-year-old told us about a time that we were on a beach and a kid had pretty aggressively said, you know, the classic, "What's the matter, don't you speak English?" And he thought that that was probably racist. He said there was a kid in his class that seemed to have kind of negative vibes towards the Asian kids, but he really wasn't sure. They're young, they don't think of themselves in terms of race, and they don't necessarily have the vernacular to characterise their experiences yet. And it made me think of a line from Richard Dawkins. A child is not a Christian child, a child is not a Muslim child, a child is the child of Christian or Muslim parents. We aren't born with preconceived ideas about race or religion or anything else. We're raised by parents who have views. We pick up cues from society, from media, from the culture we live in, and from the playground. When I taught my kids about stranger danger, they became wary of strangers. And if I teach my kids about casual racism, am I priming them to see it everywhere? On the other hand, I know now that it's incredibly important that they learn to trust their own instincts when it comes to racism without having those experiences trivialised. Now, we all want our kids to grow up in an empathetic society that does not turn a blind eye to prejudice just because it isn't directed at us. But the truth is, even in the rarefied community that I and maybe you live in, there's still a lot of turning the blind eye going on. I want to be the best dad that I can be. I love my kids. We're extremely close, and I try to share my experiences with them and lead by example. But this whole thing has made me realise that there's a big gap in my ability to do that when it comes to racism. I haven't lived it. I don't have any personal anecdotes that I can pass on about how I reacted or responded to it when I was targeted by it. But if or when my kids do experience something like this, I deeply want them to still come and discuss it with me and talk to me about it. And so I need to make it really clear to them that even though I haven't lived it, I see it and I hear them. And as they grow up, I wonder what else they're going to need from me in regards to this. And the truth is, I'm still not sure. But I feel like I'm reading the signs better. The conversation is in full swing, and my wife and I are navigating this path together. But I do think I know what they won't need. What they won't need is a dad that blusters ahead of them into situations without acknowledging the validity of their instincts because of my inherent privilege. And they won't need a dad that walks behind them passively observing but not fully engaging in an experience because it isn't directed at me. The standard that we walk past is the standard that we accept. And this whole experience has made me realise that even today in 2021, I've still been walking past some pretty low standards, and I can't do that anymore. Thank you.